some key skills then for required for the case interviews. And, I've had about 20-25 buddies, and I've taken at least about 10-15 case interviews through the period that I was associated with management consulting firms across, I've taken interviews across, I'm Bangalore, I'm Calcutta, I'm Ahmedabad, also across Delhi University, right, for different sorts of hiring processes. So I'll tell you from an interviewer's perspective, what am I actually looking for? And I'm not hinting so much on the case structure, which happens to be the last point on this list, because that is anyways hygiene, I think, right? And most people will get that right if they are prepared enough for about a month and a half, 2 months. You would not go massively wrong on these fronts. But what aspects typically get ignored, and these are the aspects that I would typically tell my buddies about, is talking about your own self and your motivations. So you have to be super sharp in saying why are you adopting a particular approach or path in your life, right? So you have to tell, you have to almost convince the interviewer of your story and your approach on every next step, right? So it's not like an arbitrary decision that you're trying to make at each step. You have a genuine thought pattern that went into making those decisions. And why MBA seems to fit into that story also. Then why consulting, again, is an offshoot of why an MBA made sense to you, and now why are you thinking about consulting? And ideally, I would not look for answers which are very, very mundane and something that people have most commonly said. So a lot of the people in the interview come in and say consulting is going to give me a variety of experience across business domains and business functions. But that's not the kind of answer that I would typically enjoy. Imagine from an interviewer's perspective, how often are you hearing that answer, and whether that will excite you at all, and whether I will be remembering that candidate when they get out of the room. Instead, I would enjoy conversations on saying why consulting, to talk about, see, I've been an individual who's been restricted to a very desk sort of a role for all the time that I have been working with different organizations. I think consulting will allow me to go at the forefront of all the action, right? To speak to some of the most senior leadership in the country at the most established organizations, right? And that just hastens my paths towards that role itself, right? So if I'm interacting with CEOs today as a management consultant, it's much more likely that I will become a CEO much faster than anyone else, right? Because I would understand how a CEO really thinks and how do they go about managing a huge business, right? So that is a much better answer than saying that I would just get experience across multiple domains and multiple functions of a business, right? So that is something that I would say. I would also say, talk about how a management consulting role opens the doors for multiple kinds of opportunities, like a startup role where you can use your entrepreneurial skills, if that is something that ends up exciting you and you start a business for yourself, right? You can also talk about how you can go into the PE VC world with a much better understanding of the nuts and bolts of a business, right? And how business decision making is undertaken, rather than purely evaluating it as per a financial metrics, right? Or read up on research. Then there's also an exit opportunity to the industry where you can think from an independent consultant's perspective, gain that understanding of being able to prioritize, project manage, huge impact strategies are created, and then you go ahead and implement some of that by being at the client, right? And being a part of the client's organization rather than running it yourself, right? So these are all potential paths that open from the management consulting world, or you can obviously become a partner in the management consulting firm itself, by which you will continue to learn at the pace that you do, right? And you will always be at the forefront or the first to understand and experience what's happening new in that particular industry that you're a part of. So those are all potential domains, and these are the kinds of answers that a typical interviewer will enjoy, because that involves the next level of thinking beyond just saying what the role offers, right? And sometimes, and again, a big no would be talking about the money, saying that just management consulting is offering you a lot of money and therefore you want to go there. In fact, like in my case, I had left a lot of lucrative roles in finance world, which were offering a lot more money while I was trying to go to a management consulting firm. I think there's a question. If no prior experience in consulting, what could make entry into the consulting role? I think no one has a previous experience in consulting. Like I didn't have a previous experience in consulting while I was applying. So I don't think they are actually looking for previous experience in consulting. You should be a sharp thinker and all of those skill sets that I talked about in the previous slides. If you have those skill sets, you are a good consultant. It doesn't matter whether you've had previous experience or not. Right, you should be able to talk about your skills and your weaknesses very well. So imagine you are your own salesperson, right? So you have to tell them what your skill sets are. So for myself, like I used to always tell them that I have some good communication skills, I hope, right? And I'm also a good problem solver, and I'm able to draw a lot of analogies from my previous experiences and bring them to the fore in case of the specific client context. So those would be things that I would talk about in the initial half of the conversation, and then I would try and project that during the course of the case interview. So it is also important that you showcase your skill sets during the case interview. So for example, if I were talking about a case on an IT services, I would somehow slip in my experience on tax consulting in there and say that this is what I'd seen in the past. And does that also apply to this particular case? So that just shows the interviewer that you are constantly thinking and trying to learn from your previous experiences, which is why being a generalist consultant is important, because you are trying to bring the best practices of sometimes the other industries into your industry and into your clients' industries. Weaknesses, again, you shouldn't talk about the basic stuff. I think too much, or I'm too much into the details. I don't think those are great ones to mention. It almost seems like you're just trying to bypass the question somehow. I think some of these genuine weaknesses that I think I can talk about is like not being enough top down in my communication or my approach. So for example, when I started talking about this slide, I mentioned 6 points and I'm taking them one by one instead of giving you an overview on what are the most critical aspects and then talking about the respective details. That's an approach to communication, right? Now, while that is one approach, what I followed was otherwise. And that maybe is one of my weaknesses, right? I'm still not top down enough in my communication, so that I build out, I give you an overview of the story first and then take you into the details. So I'm almost reading it like a book, which is not great. If otherwise I would have given you a foreword or a preface to the story, that would have made more sense to you. So that's a genuine weakness, right? And I'm trying to improve it as I go along, and I have more experience in presentation. I have more experience in working with people who are more top down in their own approach and thinking and communication, right? So that's the kind of weakness I would typically love to hear, rather than saying I'm too much into the details and therefore I miss deadlines and stuff like that. Sorry, I think there's a question. Is there anything specific an interviewer wants to know from the answers on weakness? No, not really. Yaar. It's just that you are trying to introspect and figure out where you need to improve. And they're trying to see that if you are a person who is genuinely trying to learn and grow, right? Because as a consultant, you are constantly asked to push your boundaries, both in terms of your technical skills and knowledge on the industry and domain, and also your ability to read people, interact with people, communicate with people, and so on. For example, if in my first year or so as a management consultant, I was not a great conversationalist, right? So I was not a person who could go up to the client and engage them in a small talk. But today that almost happens naturally with me. So at the end of first year, when my potential growth areas were being discussed, this was one of those points mentioned, right? I work with clients well in a work setting, but I'm not able to strike a relationship with them informally, and that is a genuine weakness, right? So that's the kind of thing that the interview would be looking for, that you identify and know your blind spots, you're aware of them, and you're working towards them, and you want to genuinely grow and improve them. So I think that was it from my end. obviously communication and projection of confidence that I've already talked about previously as major skill sets. So that you will have to show during the course of the interview.